Hello, and welcome to the Relationship Edge, a podcast for the power of relationships in the private markets. I'm joined today by my guest, Nitin Pachisia, founding partner at Unshackled Ventures. Nitin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
No, no, we're super excited for the conversation. I'll kick it off in a slightly untraditional way, which is I was looking back at your work experience and how your career began and noticed that early on in your career you worked at Deloitte. I don't see the Deloitte to entrepreneur pipeline as one that's like particularly well trodden. I don't associate Deloitte with entrepreneurs, frankly, even though Deloitte's a massive company. And so I'd love to hear the story of how you landed both in running companies, but then ultimately kind of founding a fund as you have.
Yeah, it's a great observation, and I would agree with the generalization. I think the journey is kind of more a function of being prepared to take on opportunities that came my way and accepting risk in those opportunities, right? Like I was on a decent path at Deloitte and would have been enjoying the benefits of being a partner if I stayed. Um, Along the way, what I did at Deloitte was an entrepreneurial act within Deloitte. So the first 6, 7 months of my time at Deloitte, I was working with large tech companies, and that kind of got boring. So I looked around and I saw there's all these startups around us. So started a practice within Deloitte um, to focus on startups, and that kind of took its own turn. The practice became popular. And that led to building a lot of relationships with these, the CEOs, the founders who were running these startups. 5 years later, one of those relationships was with a founder called Osman Rashid. He founded Chegg, and he was starting his next company. And so that relationship led to him asking me if I would join him in running strategy and finance at his next company, and sounded super interesting with what he was building. So I joined him, and that was my transition from consultant at Deloitte to being a controller, um, and that was super critical in what pursued after, because uh, through that experience of 3 years, I really got to learn the inner workings of how startups work with a seasoned entrepreneur who had taken a company public before. And so um, spent about 2.5 years there, and then stumbled on an opportunity as just exploring things with a few friends, and stumbled on a shopping experience that had not gone online much. And we said, what are the friction points here? Let's explore why this particular product category has not taken off online. We started building on that. But as I was unlocking that, we started signing up brands. Our user base was growing. We were all moonlighting still, and the agreement between the co-founders was, when we have three paying customers, we'll go full time. So my co-founders could go full time, but I was still on a visa, and so that particular experience of trying to figure out how will I go full time with my co-founders led to a year later starting Unshackled as a way to solve specifically for that question. So that's the journey from being a consultant at Deloitte to then starting Unshackled in April of 2014. And we're entrepreneurs, we're still operators. One of my partner we met at No, the company that I ran strategy and finance at, and very much an entrepreneurial DNA. It's just VC is our business model. So we are called VCs by trade, but functionally we're entrepreneurs.
No, it's a fascinating journey. And to your point, within Deloitte, it sounds like you were already being entrepreneurial and then found additional ways, or maybe more closer to the metal ways, for lack of a better term, of expressing that entrepreneur gene almost within yourself. And so it's really cool to see how it progressed over time, just spotting opportunities and fixing them. Um,
Yeah.
I know the thesis at Unshackled is primarily around immigrant entrepreneurs, which makes a lot of sense given the story you just told about building your own business and the struggles you had with immigration. And certainly here in the US, I think probably even globally, we're in a time where immigration is very much in the public eye, both legal and
hmm
illegal. And so I actually just love your take on like what that means for Unshackled, what that means for entrepreneurship in America as a whole, and kind of how you view it.
Um, it's a it is a big envelope, right? So a lot of layers to the onion of immigration, and we are so close to it that we get to experience all of those layers. Um, Growing up, I grew up in India, and then for 3 years before I came to the US, I was traveling in Europe and Southeast Asia. And there's different flavors of immigration in every country, right? So people, for example, are migrating from some countries to India. People from India are migrating from India to many countries, and so it's not just a one-way street. It's multiple ways. Americans go to India and are starting companies in India because they see the opportunity there. Ultimately, underlying migration is pursuit of opportunity. That opportunity could be an economic business opportunity, an education opportunity, an opportunity to live in a safer environment, right? A lot of people are migrating because where they are is not safe. And so before we can really start to appreciate the immigrant journey, I think it's important to spend some time understanding the causal aspect of why are people immigrating. And my simplification may not apply to all the cases, as it's a pursuit of an opportunity. So in pursuing that opportunity, countries like America actually have one of the best immigration policies in terms of accepting immigrants that are coming here for education, for work, for family, or escaping potential death in their countries. And so that system, as much as we may not like the imperfections in the system, because everything can be better, in my opinion, having seen many systems, is one of the best systems. And I am happy to be a beneficiary of this great system. It allowed me to pursue my entrepreneurial dream, and I would not want to be anywhere else. Um, so I kind of look at it as appreciate the human that's behind this journey, and if they've taken the steps to follow the laws of the land, and those laws of the land could be, when you're coming here as a student, follow what your visa allows you to do. When you're coming here as a worker, follow what your visa allows you to do. And if you're seeking asylum in this country, follow the laws of what that process allows you to do. Uh, that said, like you said, there's a lot of noise around immigration as well, because I may appreciate it and you may appreciate it, but there are people who are different in their opinions and don't appreciate it. And that noise, unfortunately, is not policy. And depending on which side you sit, fortunately, it's not policy. And so what I am doing with the community of immigrant entrepreneurs that we're in, which includes all types of immigration journeys, is cut out the noise, focus on what is the policy and what does this policy allow us to do. And if the policy changes, if the law changes, if someone goes into a constitutional amendment and makes the changes that need to be made, then we'll adhere to whatever the new law is. As of today, if we're in compliance with the law that exists, let's put our heads down and do the work, because we're all here for a purpose, to make ourselves better, and that contribution, by the way, goes to make the American life better. Look at the biggest innovations that have come about in the American way of living. Most of them were either entirely brought about by immigrants or with significant contributions of immigrants. Right? We got to celebrate that, and I hope someday the Americans who think immigrants are not good for them really look into their lifestyle and look at all of the key things that they use on a day-to-day basis and ask themselves, would this be possible if we didn't have immigrants coming into the country?
That's to your point, a very powerful way of thinking about it. Like, on the one hand, yeah, we seem to be in this moment where there are maybe more protectionist impulses and people being worried about immigrants coming in and quote unquote taking jobs or competing for jobs. But at the same time, as you described, so much innovation has come from people who have moved from one country to another in pursuit of opportunity, as you described it. And so I'm certainly a beneficiary of that system, as are you. My family certainly is. And would like to believe that we are contributors to this grand American experiment. And yeah, I would be quite interested to see, how all of this policy activity or noise shapes into policy activity. But I do like your approach of just focusing on the current state of the state and not worrying too much about the noise until it becomes policy. Fantastic.
Yeah,
And so,
noise can be overwhelming, and we gotta stay focused on what's real and what's important.
no, absolutely. One of the other elements of perhaps that focus on immigrants that the fund has is you talk a lot about the unique adversity muscle and grit that immigrant founders tend to bring to the table. And so it's definitely something I've seen firsthand. And so I'm actually curious, like, what are the flip sides of that? So what are some of the
Hmm.
unique downsides or challenges that immigrant founders are more likely to have or more likely to have to navigate through as a result of their unique set of experiences?
That's a great question and great way to think about how. Yeah, I'm reflecting on what resources have we built over the last 10 years to support overcoming those, right? Because we get the benefit of investing in the top talent from all over the world that's beating. So if you think of 1 million to 1.5 million immigrants coming into the US per year, they're beating 7 billion people in competition to come be selected by US schools and employers to come here. That's not easy, right? That's a lot of competition to outcompete. And so, but when you do come here, the resources that we've kind of focused on, for instance, number one that comes to mind is obviously complying with US laws. You're not in your own country. You've made the choice to be somewhere else. And in coming to that country, you can only succeed if you comply with the regulations of this country that you're now making home, right? So that's something that we do a lot of in removing that burden from the entrepreneur themselves so they can stay compliant and still do what they need to do. The other part is for a lot of countries where English is not the first language, for example, is overcoming that language aspect. Now, language has two parts. One is just understanding the vocabulary of language. The other is communicating with that same flair. So if a founder who is not born in the US is going out to raise on the same kind of idea, same kind of traction, same parameters, and they're competing with a US born founder. It's not just the choice of words, it's also just how much confidence are you conveying it with, and how much are you adding that sort of big vision hype, you can call it. um, you know the American culture is a marketing culture. We learn how to market things from early childhood. um, the non-American cultures are not so much. There's a lot of humility in most cultures, and so we have to overcome. We have to help founders overcome their humility and understand that for investors to appreciate their greatness, they will actually have to talk about their greatness, which can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So that there's two aspects of language I think are important. As you were saying, the word grit, for example, it come to me. We've seen a few examples of grit is great when you need to overcome adversity, right? And building a startup, there will be adversity at some point. Every successful company that we know of today died a few times along the way, and the only reason they stayed alive was because of the founder's will to stay alive. And so that's the positive side of grit. The other side of grit is if you get too used to being gritty, what happens? So, because you've faced adversity for a big part of your life, it kind of becomes habit to assume there's adversity. And I'm not saying this happens for most people, but a small subset of entrepreneurs may get used to just being gritty all the time. And what they may miss is when there's an opportunity to really accelerate, right? But the habit is I gotta stay gritty. That may hold them back from taking advantage of the opportunity that is in front of them. And so um, that's been an area where we've had to mentor some founders out of being gritty at times when grit is not your asset. At that time, it's flip the switch to I gotta go take advantage of the opportunity and go as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's all of those are really interesting flip sides of those advantages. One that actually came to me as an idea, and I'm curious if it resonates, is someone who has a lot of grit is used to, as you described, pushing through really difficult situations. But what if that situation is trying to tell you something, right? Like perhaps it means it's time to pivot or like
Yep.
to or to pursue some different sort of opportunity. But because you're used to not giving up and plowing through adversity, it just means
Yeah.
that you keep going in a less productive direction.
Yeah, I think that what I've experienced mostly is that grit is also coupled with a lot of curiosity and an appreciation of high opportunity cost, right? So, for an immigrant entrepreneur, there's the social safety net is not as strong, and therefore they have to be mindful of, if I'm persisting through something, is it actually making progress or I'm just being stubborn? And so I see less of those instances when grit makes you stubborn. What I see more of is grit is kind of the against all odds, the willingness to stay in the game, but you are also adjusting your game as the sport is changing, right? So if going in one direction isn't making progress, isn't giving you the outcomes that are needed, you take an orthogonal way. You may still be solving the same problem, but you're willing to change course to see if some other approach will work. And that comes from being very curious, having seen different worldviews, for example, having seen that some things work in different environments. And so, what if I apply a different thought process here? Um, yeah, I see less of that problem, but it's a useful observation.
Yeah, makes complete sense. So almost stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details, or something that approximates that
Yeah,
idea.
or a saying I heard recently from a team member is change the plan, not the goal.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So you could be flexible on the plan because there can be many ways of getting to the same goal. I think that kind of applies here.
Yeah, that completely makes sense to me. I imagine this is somewhat context dependent, but I imagine one of the downsides of being an immigrant entrepreneur is that you're leaving home. And so, as a result of leaving home, you're leaving a rich network of people and relationships in your home country or wherever it is that you're from and starting somewhat afresh. And so, I
Yep.
guess, do you see network access and kind of connections, for lack of a better term, as a challenge that holds immigrant entrepreneurs back disproportionately? Or is that something that they tend to solve for within arriving in the new country pretty quickly?
Yes, and I guess is the answer. So I think with most entrepreneurs, what I see is also a high degree of self-awareness. And so when, for instance, someone, let's say, grew up in India, went to IIT, and did great school, did great in school, had a network, and now came to the US to do their masters and then start a company. There is awareness that I don't have network here. So what I see that kind of lead to is um, that awareness leading to how do I surround myself with people who have network, or how do I go about building my network? And we do a lot of work. For instance, we run a community of founders called Immigrate, where years before you may start a company, you're in this network of other people who are like you, who are building companies or want to build companies. Some may be a few years ahead of you. So in an alternative way, entrepreneurship starts well before you start a company. And so that effort of, I don't have a network in the or recognition of, I don't have a network in the US, I should do something about it, leads to joining these communities, building networks with entrepreneurs, raising money from investors who have strong networks, and therefore could be that signal to their network that I believe in this founder and therefore you should look at that. That's an area where we've spent a lot of our time in the last 10 years, is building networks with downstream investors to really shortcut the time that our portfolio founders have to spend in raising capital downstream, right? It's not the best use of anybody's time to go to all kinds of VC events and stuff. Like, that's one way of doing it. But if you have investors who have strong networks, they can amplify your time and save you a ton of time. So I'd say that awareness exists, and different people take different paths to solve for that. But 100%, network is a key asset when you're building a company. You need to have access to people who will accelerate your journey, either through capital, through talent, access to customers. There's all of that is access.
Totally makes sense to me. I imagine also an asset as you build and operate a fund as well. And so maybe kind of in relation to that point, I'd be curious what the single biggest either win or opportunity that's come your way as an investor that you can trace back to your network or your relationships.
I single biggest could be too difficult to answer, but I think a lot of our success really comes down to people we're surrounded by. My partner Manan and I reminisce about this. Is it's success is a function of who you know, not just what you know. And the who you know part is purely, have you invested effort in building relationships? Because if you've met people transactionally and you do the transaction, then you move on, there's really no reason to go back or for them to come back to you when unless there's another transactional need. And so what's worked for us really is we've met people who, for example, could be LPs that we met 8 years ago, and our fund was too small for them. We didn't stop connecting with them. Anytime we were in their town, we would offer to meet for a coffee, offer to meet, and just exchange insights. Completely non-transactional. Here's what we're seeing in the market from our perspective. What are you seeing? And there's a common sort of goal of learning that comes through from that. What that also did for us is it helped us qualify people who were willing to invest in the relationship. So I may want to build a relationship with you, but if you are not so interested in that, it doesn't really work, right? So there's a self-selection process, and we've really seen relationships take years to develop, and then something comes up which leads to a transactional way of engaging, right? So becoming an LP in the fund, or us investing in someone, or one of our LPs, for example, maybe a CEO of a company and buys the software service from a portfolio company. Those things are all underlying them are strong relationships that lead to good people being in presence of good people, and then ultimately both are getting something with respect to the purpose or the business that they're engaged in. And that has, we practice that non-transactional way of relationship building a lot.
No, it completely makes sense to me. And over the course of, at this point, a decade-ish, like probably running Unshackled, I imagine that network of relationships has only compounded and exploded. I'd be curious, like how you operationalize the practice of that non-transactional relationship building. So, like, are there habits you regularly perform, like tools that you use, like goals that you set? Like, curious how you think about it.
It's an evolution of learning. Learning how. Well, first of all, learning what's important to the other person in that relationship, and not just centering on what's important to me. Once I learn what's important to you, I can then bring, whenever there's an opportunity to connect, I can bring something useful to you, make your time worth it, and being clear about my intention. Like I really practice, if I am meeting you without an agenda, I will explicitly say, I do not have an agenda, so prioritize it accordingly. But I'll be in your town, and if you have time for a coffee, let's chat. I would like to learn about this aspect because currently I'm in this journey of learning about this. And that's often led to many of the people that I have deep relationships with. We may not have done business together, but we've learned a lot from each other. So that clarity of intention, communicating that I'm coming with not a transactional agenda, but I just want to learn. So if you don't have time for it today, that's okay. Like, prioritize something that may be more of a business need today. So that's one. The other is really creating time and space for relationships, because if we're just running from transaction to transaction, it's easy to drop attention to what are you going through. right now. And there could be a lot. We're all humans. We a lot. You can put people in different buckets. You're a VC, you're a founder, you're an LP, you're a politician, you're whatever. Underlying all those labels is a human. And so, I think the practice of creating the time and space to appreciate the human behind the label has led to connecting at that human level. And then when there is a need for the labels to come into play for a business transaction to happen, that just organically happens. And I've really enjoyed building relationships that way. And then just being mindful that everybody's time is valuable. So if I'm asking for somebody's time, I should bring something to the table that makes it enjoyable and valuable to them.
No, that's a super useful framework for the way to think about it. Starting at the human level, building the relationship with the human and trying to create some value for the human, knowing that over time, if there's exists an opportunity for a mutually beneficial transaction, you'll probably be top of mind in that moment due to the relationship with the human.
Right. And that just happens so organically and so easily at that time, that because you have a trust built, you have some repo going, and the transactions become much easier in that format.
Yeah, I can totally understand how that would work. Fantastic. I'm recognizing we've taken a fair bit of your time here. So I will ask you our final closing question, which is, what is the single biggest lesson you've learned about relationship management that you think most people get wrong?
Ooh, most people get wrong something about relationship management. Um, I'd say this with, I don't know about most people, but I think there's cultural nuances between East Coast and West Coast of the US. And the West Coast relationship building is very much, if I go to someone for help, I'm more likely to get that help even if I don't have something to offer, because there's this system of I help you, you help somebody, they help somebody else, and the circle kind of goes around. The East Coast way of relationship building is I do something for you, you do something for me at some point in time. And so I don't think it's so much getting it wrong. I think it kind of goes more back to what I was saying earlier, is understanding the human, and appreciating that there could be cultural nuances, and it doesn't make them good or bad. It doesn't make the behavior good or bad. It's just what has been practiced in that culture, or for that person. So if I can appreciate the human, it gives me an opportunity um, to appreciate where they may be coming from. And then it's less of a judgment and more of an observation. And now I can adjust my relationship building style to who I am working with. Both like the East Coast, West Coast as a generalization, because it's millions of people that we're talking about. So I don't want to convey that everybody on the East Coast is the same and everybody on the West Coast is the same. I'm just using that as an example of where really applying generalizations or applying the same approach to everybody may not work. But if there's an opportunity to appreciate how the particular person you're talking to operates, and why, it may become easier to build a relationship with them.
No. The idea that relationship building is context specific is definitely the theme I hear in that conversation. That, again, is something I'll probably take away from that point for myself to go think about, which is fantastic. Well,
If I may
Nitin,
prompt that back to you, what is
ooh,
that? What is that one thing for you?
man, I feel like I should have an answer off the top of my head for this at this point. Um, I would probably say something related to something you've talked about in this conversation is, how do you think about generating and creating value for the other people that you know and engage with in a non-transactional way is something that I see not enough activity on relative to
Mm,
the pure transactional conversation. I think the number of people who see something interesting in the news or a piece of content that they read or what have you and said, hey, like this reminded me of this conversation that we've had before, or some way of just engaging with that person non-transactionally is something I think is incredibly powerful when it comes to building that long run relationship that might one day result in a transaction or maybe not. Um, that I don't see as commonly as I think should exist. So that's probably my answer, having thought about it
Mm,
very quickly.
I appreciate that.
Well, then this has been a fantastic episode. So thank you first and foremost for being willing to spend the time with us. For our listeners who may want to learn more about you, Unshackled, and follow your journey, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn with that unique name. It should be easy to find me. Unshackled, obviously, Unshackled Ventures has a LinkedIn page. We have our Twitter or X accounts. I'm at immigrating on X. That's IMMIGREATING. And then the best place to connect with us if you're a founder, a foreign born founder, is the Immigrate Slack community. And to find that, you can come to our website, unshackledvc.com, and click on the community link. That's a community exclusively for entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of ideation, collaboration going on in that community.
Fantastic. But that's a great X or slash Twitter handle, by the way. That's a great get. Well, thank you again for the time, and thanks to all of our listeners for listening.
Thank you.